Thomas and Edward gave a splendid effort building the railway, but they weren't suited for fast mainline services. As such, the Fat Controller purchased 2 other engines. One of them was Henry. Although he was a good sort, he was prone to steaming troubles, which caused endless frustration. Gordon was an experimental prototype, but because he was brought to haul express trains on the main line, he often looked down on the smaller engines, and it made him boastful. During this time, engines were loaned from other railways. One of these didn't have a name, just a number, 87546. He fancied himself the savior of the line, and never failed to make it known. "Fret no longer," he declared, as he dragged Henry and his trainers to the big station one day, "for I have restored order to our timetable once more." "Does he ever get tired of all that hot air in his boiler?" Thomas remarked to Edward. "I say, you little one," the big engine beckoned to Thomas, "be a good lackey. Take my coaches and the indisposed away. I must rest my aching wheels." "Evidently not," murmured Edward. As Thomas buffered up, Henry couldn't even meet his gaze. "I'm sorry," he sighed. "He should be sorry," retorted Thomas. "One day, he'll get his." That night, as Thomas retired to the shed, a vulgar discourse greeted him. "You know," 87546 said loudly to Gordon, "I do sympathize with the Fat Controller. Wasted what little hard-earned time and money he had on a mite, an antique, and an invalid." He looked across to Henry as the workman tried to mend him. "I'm the real bargain," 87546 continued. "The strength of 3 for the coal and water consumption of 1. Only a matter of time before he purchases me." "The Fat Controller," Edward interjected, "favors engines with good character. You leave much to be desired in that department." "And where has good character led you?" replied 87546. "Certainly not the main line. Speed and strength are all that matters there. When I pull coaches, you merely see a streak of blue. Engines like you fade into the background. I'd like to see you do my work without falling to pieces. Now, a more pressing matter. When I am purchased, what do you suppose my proper name should be? I fancy something regal. Lord Frederick Regamy has a certain charm to it." Thomas was about to retort, but Edward gave him a look. "Save your steam," he muttered. "It's no use arguing with him." They stared at the loaned engine with contempt, but Henry had heard everything and made a plan. The next morning, 87546 awoke to a startling sight. There was Henry, hissing and wheezing, halfway on the turntable. "What's this?" he demanded. "Oh dear," Henry coughed feebly. "I thought the men had made me better." "Well, get better and out of my way this instant," demanded 87546. "My admiring passengers are waiting. I demand extrication at once." But the other engines had all left for their work. They couldn't have helped him anyhow, for there was no way onto the turntable. Meanwhile, the Fat Controller was getting anxious. "Worse and worse," he scowled. "The passengers can't be kept waiting. I'm sorry, Edward. As the others have gone, you'll have to take the coaches." Edward gulped, staring at the long train. "But sir," he replied, "this is a bit beyond my capabilities." "Not if I helped you," said Thomas as he shuffled alongside. "2 engines are better than 1, sir. Besides, the others can manage their own shunting for a while." The Fat Controller considered. "Very well," he said at last. "Off you go. Do your best, but please take care." The engines backed excitedly onto the train. The passengers marveled at the strange combination, but were thankful to have any train at all. Finally, the guard's whistle blew. Come on," called Thomas. Steady now, advised Edward. Soon they were out on the main line and were having a wonderful time. Thomas was so excited to leave the yard, he nearly pulled Edward's coupling on. Edward chuckled. He was glad to stretch his wheels again. The 2 engines worked so well, the coaches felt light as air. Other engines were shocked as they raced past, whistling with glee. Later, they returned to the big station, exhausted but triumphant. Henry and 87546 stood at the platform. Well, smiled Henry. Our streak of blue has returned, and in one piece, no less. 87546 scowled as the happy passengers swarmed out of the coaches. What splendid little engines you are! Your controller must be proud of you. He's very happy with his purchases indeed, chuckled Thomas. Humph, fumed 87546 as he puffed away. You were only allowed out of the yard because cranky old Edward couldn't manage alone. Enjoy your brief moments in the limelight. It's already fading. If I didn't know any better, smirked Thomas, I'd say he didn't like shunting his own train. He chortled off to the water column, but Edward stayed behind. I'm all right, Henry. What on earth happened this morning? Oh, the usual steaming troubles. You know how it is. Miraculously, he grinned. The problem seemed to vanish after you'd gone. You didn't, Edward gasped. Now, Edward, Henry grinned. Do you really think I'd do such a thing? And without another word, Henry steamed away. He didn't need to say anything, but Edward knew exactly what he meant. Henry the Green Engine had steaming troubles. Some days he woke up raring to go, others he felt utterly feeble. His crew tried hard to make him better, but to no avail. Because his firebox was too small to make enough steam, Henry felt that despite he could pull trains, he sometimes felt he had no strength at all. Henry usually pulled the first train. Each morning, Thomas brought his coaches to the platform and pushed from behind to help Henry start. He always whistled good luck, and Henry would whistle thank you no matter how little steam he had. This made Thomas happy, but deep down, Henry's troubles concerned him. He can't help feeling unwell. The Fat Controller must know that, he confided to Edward one day. You don't think he'd replace Henry, do you? The Fat Controller always gives engines a fair chance, smiled Edward, and Henry's a good sort. Even so, he sighed, something must be done. Thomas gulped. Edward's remark didn't feel very reassuring. Later, Thomas was shunting when he saw the Fat Controller talking to the station master. He couldn't quite hear the discussion as Gordon came puffing in with the express, but he did hear Henry and making arrangements. Oh dear, Henry is being replaced, he thought. Little Thomas beckoned Gordon. My coaches need shunting, thank you very much. As Thomas coupled to the train, a thought struck him. A hackside could? Yes, it's perfect, he beamed. The next morning, he brought Henry's coaches to the platform as usual. Henry soon arrived and the passengers began to board. Thomas could hear Henry wheezing at the head of the train. Don't worry, Henry, he smiled. You'll be all right now. The guard's whistle blew and Henry started off. Thomas followed smoothly at first, but suddenly jerked forward. Thrown off balance, his crew fell from the cab. By the time they picked themselves up, Thomas was steaming away. What do you think you're doing, you silly engine? Called the driver. Thomas knew exactly what he was doing. He had remembered Gordon's trick of leaving before he could be uncoupled. This time, he wanted to follow on. I'm helping Henry! I'm helping Henry! He smirked. Cheeky engine, fussed the coaches. Henry was amazed how easy it felt to pull his train. That's good, come along, he sang. But it wouldn't be good for long. As they approached the first station, Henry slowed down, but Thomas didn't. He was so pleased with his plan that he wasn't paying attention. Stop! Stop! Shrieking coaches. Without his driver, Thomas couldn't stop. Henry braked with all his might. The train slowed to a crawl, but Thomas's wheels kept spinning. Oh! He winced and shut his eyes. Suddenly, he felt his handbrake move, and his steam was shut off. He opened his eyes. They stopped at the platform, with angry passengers swarming around a flustered Henry. Thomas thought he had gotten away with his trick, but there, stepping out of his cab, was the Fat Controller. I appreciate you helping the train start, but this habit of gallivanting after them must stop, Thomas. You've no business running off down the main line, especially without your driver. I'm sorry, sir, sighed Thomas, but I didn't want you to send Henry away. He explained what he'd overheard. The Fat Controller laughed. I'm afraid you've let yourself get carried away, he chuckled. I'm not sending Henry away. I'm rearranging his timetable. If Edward takes the first train, Henry will have more time to build up steam, which should help him greatly. Thomas beamed. He'd never been so relieved to be wrong. Now, back to the yard with you. I have disgruntled passengers to pacify, finished the Fat Controller. Oh, yes, sir. I'm sorry, sir, blushed Thomas, and he scampered away. That night, Henry backed down beside Thomas in the shed. It was most kind of you to help me. Now that I have more time to build steam, maybe all my trains will be that easy to pull, even without you at the back, he chuckled. Thomas smiled, for he was thankful that his friend Henry the Green Engine wasn't going anywhere. Only a few weeks had passed since Edward helped Gordon up the hill. It had been Edward's first day out in a long time, and almost all of the engines had given Edward their full support. However, two did not. Gordon and 98462 were quite displeased with Edward. 98462 was one of 3 engines brought by the Fat Controller to the railway on trial. He didn't have a name, just a number. 98462 and Gordon had a great deal in common. They were both rude, boastful, pompous, and cocky. However, the engine never seemed to know when enough was enough. "Ha! You finally managed to make it up at the station," cackled 98462 as Edward backed down into the sheds one night. Edward had just returned from his passenger run and was feeling quite proud. "What a useless engine you are, Edward. I am sure we'll be hearing plenty of complaints from the passengers tomorrow. You must have been running late all day." The others gave 98462 a foul look, but Edward just smiled. "Actually, we were right on time, and I am very happy to be useful again," he chuckled. Edward knew that as long as he did not let 98462's words bother him, the engine wouldn't berate him for long. And soon enough, not getting any sort of reaction out of Edward, that big blue bully drifted off to sleep. As Edward was now working regularly on passenger trains, the Fat Controller extended the timetable to run later into the evenings. This now meant that Edward, Gordon, and 98462 would be running the passenger service all across the island. Edward had his doubts, but was determined to work his hardest. Fortunately for him, he ran the loop line, so only saw Gordon and 98462 at the big station. The weeks passed. Edward thought his trains were getting heavier and heavier. Or he was getting older and older. The other engines noticed this and offered to help. "No thank you," panted Edward. "You have your own trains to manage. We can't upset the Fat Controller's timetable." Little did Edward know, 98462 had heard everything and made a plan. Edward arrived at the big station to collect his first passenger train. When he arrived, he saw there were no coaches. Thomas must have woken up late again, he thought. He was just about to go collect some more when 98462 came hooting and wheezing into the platform with Edward's coaches. "No need to fret," he said snootily. "I will be taking your train today. We mustn't upset the Fat Controller's timetable." He laughed loudly as the guard blew his whistle and set off. Edward was upset, but he thought it best to get on with his work. That evening, Edward was backing into the shed as 98462 was boasting loudly. "We don't need Edward anymore. I have proven I can manage 2 trains at once. Why keep him around when all he does is get in the way?" Thomas, who had been listening, lost patience. "Edward helped build these rails that you run on," he fumed. "Without him, none of us would have a railway to work on." 98462 interjected. "He's a thing of the past. Us bigger tender engines are faster, stronger, and more up-to-date than old iron." Edward finally gave in. He had to take a stand against 98462. The next morning, Edward woke up earlier than usual to collect his coaches and make it to the platform before 98462. The yard was silent, and Edward felt sure he had beaten him. He was almost at the points leading to the main line when he heard a loud "toot, toot." Edward stopped in awe. "And what do you think you're doing?" fussed 98462. Edward tried to sound brave. "Collecting my coaches for my passenger train," he replied. "I don't think so," 98462 growled. "You are nothing but slow and old. You are going to sit in the shed and wait to be sent away?" Edward's heart sank, but not for long. "And just what do you think you're doing?" said the Fat Controller. 98462 almost jumped. "Collecting my train, sir," he replied, trying to look as innocent as he could. "From what I've just seen, that is not the case at all. I've had passenger complaints saying they were taken to the wrong stations, and engines complaining about their treatment of others," said the Fat Controller. "My engines," he went on, "work hard and help fellow engines. You have done neither of those. Let me remind you I brought you to work here on trial, and I can see you are not fit for my railway. You shall go back home to the other railway tonight. For now, I want you to go back to the sheds." 98462 couldn't muster up a response, so he sulked back to the sheds. The Fat Controller turned to Edward. "You must understand, Edward, you are one of my engines. You might not think so, but you are not alone on this railway. If you have any troubles, you must come and see me right away. Understand?" Edward could see from his warm smile that the Fat Controller was told everything. He looked across the yard and saw Henry and Thomas smiling back. "Yes, sir," he replied with enthusiasm. "Now you have a train to pull. Then after that, I want you to have a nice long rest," said the Fat Controller. "Thank you, sir," smiled Edward. And as he set off, he felt his position on the Fat Controller's railway was secure, and had no more troubles from that day on. Gordon, on the other hand, thought differently. But that's another story. When Gordon first arrived on the railway, the Fat Controller purchased brand new express coaches for him. They had sturdy metal bodies, smooth bogies, and separate compartments for the passengers. Gordon was well pleased with his coaches. The old coaches felt left out. Time and wear led the railway inspectors to see them as unworthy of the main line. The coaches were most upset. "Cheer up," smiled Edward as he shunted them into the carriage sidings. "You'll still be useful on the branch line trains." "Branch line trains," they shuddered. "How embarrassing." Whilst Henry was shut in the tunnel, Edward took over his local trains. He knew all about being left behind and brought the old coaches out every chance he got. This cheered them up until Gordon voiced his opinions. "A pity," he sniffed as Edward shuffled in with the coaches, "but that's the price of progress. Why, even you would have been a prime express engine at one point, Edward. I suppose it's only natural that modern engines require modern coaches." "Is that so?" smirked Edward. "Why, I think you'd look more distinguished pulling these old dears." "Oh, no thank you," Gordon harumphed. "They'd be open-top carriages before I even reached top speed. Now these are proper coaches," he finished, eyeing the express behind him. "Is that what they are? I thought someone had stretched out the goods vans, and you were doing some real work for a change," laughed Thomas as he shuffled past with some trucks. Edward couldn't help but chuckle, and Gordon fumed out of the station. His mood didn't improve on the main line. They were running well, too well. "Settle down, Gordon," scolded the driver. "You'll do a number on yourself. Make no mistake." Real work, muttered Gordon. "I'll show those engines a thing or two about real work." The next morning, Gordon tried to leave the sheds, but he couldn't. "What's happened to me?" he groaned. The crew inspected him and quickly found the problem. "Something's wrong with your tender brake," sighed the fireman. "And with how you were going about yesterday, I'm not surprised." "And you thought the old coaches were the ones who had fallen apart," laughed Thomas. Edward shot him a look. "This is no time for teasing, Thomas. The express must go out on time." "Pa, and how?" grunted Gordon. "You aren't strong enough to pull those coaches, Edward." Edward glanced at the coaches in the carriage sidings, and then he spotted something else. The passengers were growing impatient. There was no train ready for them, and it would soon be time to leave. The Fat Controller had just stepped out of his office to see what the matter was, when he saw a most peculiar sight. Edward came steaming in with all the old coaches he could find. The passengers were surprised, but were thankful they had a train at all. They hurriedly boarded the coaches, and the Fat Controller smiled. "Well done, Edward. Most resourceful of you. Don't push yourself too hard now." "I may not match Gordon's pace, sir," smiled Edward, "but I'll have a jolly good try." The guard blew his whistle, and Edward started away. Soon he was coasting down the main line, making excellent time. He whooshed through the tunnel, giving Henry quite a surprise. "Go on, Edward, go on," he cheered. Come along, Edward puffed. Gentle and fast, cooed the coaches. They were very pleased with Edward. At the last station, the passengers cheered and thanked Edward. 98462 was most amused, but looked on with admiration. Edward just smiled. He was thankful for a rest and a drink. Edward spoke kindly to the old coaches. "Well, dears, how did you fancy a return to the glory of the express?" "Oh, it was lovely," Edward smiled one. "Although," added another, "perhaps you are right. Some leisurely branch line work sounds most enticing." "Well," Edward laughed, "I'd say it's time for a well-earned rest in the carriage shed. Come along." "That won't be necessary," said a voice. Gordon slunk up alongside. "The Fat Controller has given me temporary reprieve from the rigors of mainline work to rest my wheels," he stated grandly. "I shall escort these fine coaches to the shed." "That's not what he said," smirked Thomas. "He said you were to shunt in the yard until you learn not to be so big in the smoke box." "Take us away then, double quick, chop chop," ordered the old coaches. Edward and Thomas laughed. Gordon went red in the face and shuffled silently away. winter on the island of Sodor. Heavy dark clouds filled the sky. That night, the snow fell, and deep drifts piled up in the surrounding countryside. One morning, Bertie set out early from the bus yard to collect passengers for Thomas's early morning train. No sooner had Thomas, Annie and Clarabel arrived at the junction when Bertie soon came back, and no passengers came out. "We can't get over the hill," Bertie told Thomas. "The passengers said it's not so bad on the other side of the hill, but up on top there are drifts higher than my roof. We were lucky to be able to turn around. You'll need to go steady at the tunnel, Thomas. I expect the snow is deep there too." Just then, an important-looking man stepped out of Bertie, and the station master came to meet him. Just then, Percy arrived with some trucks. "The snow is deep near the tunnel," he warned them. "The cutting was nearly full of it. Even I couldn't get through. I really need to get a snowplow someday." "Never mind, Thomas," said his driver. "You are heavier than Percy, so perhaps we can force our way through." Thomas, Annie and Clarabel set off with the snowplow. But when they reached the cutting, they found that the snow was so thick that it bent the snowplow, which began to damage the rails. "That's torn it," said Thomas's driver. "We'll never get through now." They took the snowplow off, left it beside the line, and went back to the station. Thomas was about to take Annie and Clarabel to their shed when the station master came up with the important-looking gentleman. "This gentleman has to see Mr. Kindly," he said. "It's a very important matter, and he must see him today at all costs." Thomas's driver scratched his head. "Well, I'm blowed if I know how," he said. "Without a snowplow, we can't get through the cutting that's blocked with snow." "A bulldozer would be handy," remarked the fireman. "What about Terence?" asked Thomas. "Hasn't he got one of those snowplow things that the farmer fits in front sometimes?" "Well done, Thomas," exclaimed his driver. "We'll ask the farmer straight away." And the station master ran back to the office to telephone. Just then, Toby arrived with Henrietta. The workmen loaded their tools into her, and they were on their way. By the time Toby had taken some workmen to the cutting, Terence was already at work. By lunchtime, the line was clear, and Toby arrived back at the station to tell Thomas the good news. The important visitor got on board, with Thomas, Annie and Clarabel at the front, and Toby and Henrietta at the back. The special train set off for the lonely little cottage. Deep walls of snow stood like cliffs on either side of the lines that Terence and the workmen had cleared, and the two engines puffed triumphantly between them. As soon as they made their way through the tunnel, Thomas found out Bertie was right. The snow was a lot less deep on that side of the hill. Before long, the two engines arrived at the cottage. The station master had telephoned to let Mr. Kindly know that a special train was on its way, and he was waiting for them at the end of his garden. The guard helped the important-looking man from the train, and both Mr. Kindly and his visitor came to thank Thomas and Toby. The guard walked them up to the house to make sure they did not slip on the icy path. And then Thomas and Toby, cold but happy, made their way back to the sheds. When the Fat Controller heard the story, he was very pleased too, and made a special journey to the sheds to see his engines. "I've said it before and I'll say it again," he said. "There can be no doubt that Thomas is a really useful engine. I wouldn't have gotten through if it hadn't been for Toby and Terence," said Thomas. "They're great friends to work with in the snow." And Toby and Terence had to agree that their good friend Thomas was always right. Thomas the Tank Engine loves his work on his branch line. He enjoys pulling passenger trains with his faithful coaches Annie and Clarabel. They sing songs to one another as they puff up and down the line, stopping from station to station. Often they would meet Bertie the bus at some of the stations to collect and drop off passengers. Thomas and Bertie are firm friends, but one morning Bertie was incredibly late at the station, which made Thomas cross. I knew Bertie could be a slowpoke, but this is ridiculous, he puffed angrily. The waiting passengers were growing as impatient as Thomas. They were about to complain to the station master when they heard a horn in the distance. Poor Bertie rolled into the station trying to catch his breath. I am sorry, Thomas. There's roadworks being done in the town. I had to go the long way round, panted Bertie. Huh, sniffed Thomas. Rails have always been better than roads. Take my advice, Bertie. Strap your tires and get nice sturdy wheels like mine. Then you could almost be as useful as me. Bertie frowned as Thomas chortled away. Annie and Clarabel gave him pitying looks as they passed. For the rest of the week, Bertie continued to be delayed by the roadworks. Each time he met Thomas, he'd apologize for being late, but Thomas would only tease him and boast about his rails. Bertie found it all exhausting. Never fail with rail, that's what I say, jeered Thomas whenever they met. Be kind to Bertie, he's doing his best. Be kind to Bertie, he's doing his best, sang Annie and Clarabel crossly as they ran behind Thomas. Thomas was becoming far too boastful for his own good. He began sneering at the roads and the vehicles that travelled on them. One bright and sunny morning, Thomas was dozing comfortably in his shed as his fire began burning brightly. His driver and fireman soon arrived for work. Come along, Thomas. We must collect the milk today, reminded his driver as he opened Thomas's regulator. Every morning, Thomas collects a milk wagon and carries it with his first passenger train. The wagon is often stored in the yards by Annie and Clarabel's shed. Thomas was just crossing over the points to couple up to the wagon when he heard a racket behind him. It was Bertie. He was red in the face and his engine was making an awful noise. Hello, Bertie. Come to join the rails? Very sensible, chuckled Thomas. Bertie scowled at the tank engine. So, this is the thanks I get. After I ruined my engine to get here early, puffed Bertie, trying to catch his breath. You'd never find me out of sorts because of my rails, Thomas boasted. I just follow them and they take me wherever I need to go. Never fail with rail. That's what I... Oh! Thomas was so busy boasting to Bertie, he didn't notice that as he was crossing over the point, he must have felt a jolt and had fallen in between the rails. Luckily, no one was hurt, but Thomas sat crooked on his side. Bertie laughed as men came to inspect the tilted tank engine. Seems the points weren't set properly, explained a workman. We'll have to get a crane to put this right. Thomas went red with embarrassment as he looked down at his buffers. Remind me, Thomas, what is it you said? Never fail with rail, chuckled Bertie. It certainly doesn't look like that to me. Percy brought the breakdown train to help re-rail Thomas, and to take Annie and Clarabel in his replacement. The fat controller spoke severely to Thomas once he was placed back onto the tracks. I hear you've been boasting to Bertie about your rails. May I remind you that without him your branch line would not run as smoothly as it usually does, said the fat controller sternly. Sorry, sir, faltered Thomas. When you return from the works, I hope you will be a more sensible engine and a better friend to Bertie, continued the fat controller. Yes, sir, said Thomas. A week later, Thomas was repaired and back on his branch line. He met Bertie at the top station. I'm sorry I was so rude to you, Bertie. I got too big for my buffers. My branch line wouldn't be the same without you, sighed Thomas. I know, said Bertie, but I'm glad you've seen sense. I wouldn't want to work anywhere else other than your branch line. The two friends smiled at each other, and as the guard's whistle blew, Thomas and Bertie gave cheerful toots and peeps to each other as they left with their passengers. One day, Percy was standing at the junction. He had a long goods train which he was taking to the big station, but he had to wait for Henry to pass with a passenger train before he could go on. Henry was late, but the sun was warm and Percy didn't mind. At last, Henry arrived. "Sorry I'm late," he panted. "I had to wait ages for the connection at the other railway. Do you know," he went on, "that they have goods trains on the other railway that don't have brake vans? It doesn't seem right, does it? You still got yours, I'm glad to see. Ah, there's the signal. I must try and make up a bit more lost time. Goodbye." And he puffed importantly away. Later, Percy told his driver what Henry had said about brake vans. His driver laughed. "Goods trains on the other railway have special brakes," he explained, "like passenger trains and the Flying Kipper. They don't need brake vans. Your trucks just have couplings, so they need brakes at each end of the train in case a coupling snaps. You know how stupid trucks can be. They did it to James on Gordon's Hill, remember?" "Oh," scoffed Percy, "I know how to keep my trucks in order. What's good enough for the other railway is good enough for me. I don't need a stupid brake van." "Don't be so silly, Percy," said his driver. Percy took no notice. It would have been better if he had. A few days later, Percy was shunting trucks at the harbour near the big station. He was just completing his train by backing onto the brake van when the shunter's attention was distracted. The shunter thought he had coupled the brake van to the train, but he hadn't. The guard blew his whistle and Percy set off quickly, hoping to get a run at the hill leading to the main line. But the guard and his brake van were left behind. The guard waved and shouted, but Percy didn't hear. He was too busy climbing the hill. Hurry along, puffed Percy to the trucks. Trickety-trot, we're coming along, said the trucks. All might have been well if Percy had not started so quickly. Unfortunately, the jerk had weakened one of the couplings. As Percy snorted up the hill, the weight of the loaded trucks dragging behind the weak coupling broke it. The last 4 trucks began to run back down the slope towards the harbour. The guard was standing on the veranda of the brake van, and he saw the trucks coming. Quickly, he ran to the brake handle and checked that it was fully on. Then he jumped clear. He was just in time. The trucks hit the brake van with a resounding crash. The van shuddered and was pushed along the line, but somehow it stayed on the rails, and the truck's mad rush was halted. Meanwhile, Percy's fireman had noticed that they had lost the tail of their train. Percy came slowly back down the hill to see what had happened. "Phew," remarked Percy's driver as they helped clear up the mess. "You see, Percy, brake vans do have their uses after all." And Percy had to admit that his driver was right. As soon as he was coupled up to the trucks, Percy started off again, taking the brake van with him. Percy felt rather silly, but unluckily for him, the story soon spread. That night, all the engines had heard about Percy's mishap at the harbour. "Did you know," remarked Henry, "that Percy can prove that goods trains don't need brake vans?" The other engines giggled. "Really?" retorted James. "I thought they did." "Well," said Henry, "trucks will be trucks, but they don't seem to work when they're on hills. You see," he went on, "passenger trains and the Flying Kipper have special brakes. Percy's brake van can only stop runaway trucks, but I don't suppose it can stop a whole goods train from being a gravity train." The engines all laughed and joked about it, but Percy, on the other hand, pretended he hadn't heard. One morning, James was cross. The fat controller had sent him to collect Welsh coal for Henry. He grumbled as the trucks bounced behind him. "It's not fair. I have to cover Henry's trains when he's sick, and now I'm his errand boy. Ridiculous." During that time, Henry hadn't been feeling well, so the fat controller ordered some special Welsh coal for him. When it arrived, Henry was delighted. He'd never felt so well in his life. The fat controller had a sign placed near the coal bunker which read, "Notice, strictly private, best Welsh coal, for Henry only, by order." The other engines understood and respected this, all except James. He was jealous. The next day, he was still cross when he arrived at Edward Station. "Look at him swanking about," James complained to Edward. "I fetched it for him, and I didn't even get a thank you." "I'm sure it's appreciated," Edward smiled. "I must admit that coal has done wonders for Henry. Imagine what it might do for us." Edward meant this in jest, but James smirked. "I wonder," he remarked. "Get that idea out of your smoke box," frowned Edward. "You know full well not to take that coal. Poor Henry has suffered enough, if not counting you too. He doesn't need you pilfering the one thing that's making him better." James said nothing more as he left with his passengers, but he began making a plan. Over the next few days, James pestered his crew about the coal. No matter how many times he asked, the answer was always no, but James was persistent and wouldn't relent. "He's insufferable," grumbled the driver. "Perhaps we should just give him some." "You know we can't," sighed the fireman. Then an idea struck him. "Unless," he added. The fireman smirked and whispered his idea to the driver. The next morning, James's crew came early to the sheds. He was surprised to see them. "You know, old boy," whispered the driver, "you're right. You do deserve some of Henry's coal. Let's hurry to the bunker, but keep quiet. We'll be loaded up and away before anyone notices." James was giddy, but he did his best to contain his excitement. James arrived at the coal bunkers. He couldn't see what his fireman was doing, but didn't give it a second thought. He sizzled happily. I'll show them, he thought cheekily. But what James didn't know was that his fireman was shoveling regular coal into his tender. James had forgotten the bunker the other engines used was right next to Henry's. Soon, the fireman was finished. "Right, James," he said. "Off we go." James puffed away as quickly and quietly as he could. James arrived at the big station full of pride. He had plenty of steam and was so early that his train wasn't ready. "Never mind," he scoffed. "I'm so strong, I'll have this sorted in no time." James set to work smoothly shunting the trucks in line. The trucks were surprised, but didn't want to jeopardize the newfound respect they were receiving. Soon, all was ready, and the guard blew his whistle. Here we go," James chortled. The trucks couldn't have held back if they wanted to. James took off like a rocket. James sped down the line. Hillsides and houses were a blur, and children pointed in amazement as he passed. "Perhaps this wasn't such a good idea," remarked the fireman. The driver, trying to keep his balance, said nothing. James was early at every station, made no fuss about shunting, and seemed to leave as quickly as he came. Every passing engine was quite surprised. By the end of the afternoon, James arrived back at the shed. He was feeling very pleased with himself. "Couldn't be better," he smirked. "Why waste that special coal on an engine like Henry, when I make much better use of it?" "I beg your pardon." James gulped. Walking towards him was the fat controller. "I had come to congratulate you on your fine work today," he grumbled, "but it appears we have another matter to address." James gulped. "As far as I'm aware," continued the fat controller, "only Henry is permitted to use that coal. Now, is your name Henry?" No, sir, it isn't," stammered James. "Then why did you take that coal?" asked the fat controller. "Pardon me, sir," said James's fireman, "but you've got it all wrong." And they explained the trick. When James heard about it, he was horrified. "So, all day, I've been using Regular coal? The driver, fireman, and even the fat controller burst out laughing. James blushed and looked at his buffers. Well, James, smiled the fat controller, I must apologize for my previous assumption. You did a splendid job today. Hard work does not go unappreciated on my railway. James grinned in anticipation. As such, you will continue with goods work for the remainder of the week, said the fat controller. James was speechless. Now that we know what you're really capable of, it should prove no challenge for you. Besides, finished the fat controller, I'm sure it'll dissuade you from any further schemes of taking Henry's coal. Yes, sir, mumbled James in annoyance. James did stay on the goods work. He hated it, but wasn't about to disappoint the fat controller. He worked hard all week and was thankful when it was over. He was going back to the shed when he saw Henry and Percy at the coal bunker. You know, Henry, giggled Percy, this coal makes me feel stronger than ever. Sounds to me like you've taken James's special coal, laughed Henry. James said nothing. He just sulked in the shed.
Bertie the bus has worked alongside Thomas's branch line for a very long time and is proud to be a part of the line. The engines know that they can rely on Bertie and he knows he can rely on them. Bertie is an essential part of the smooth running of the line and wouldn't want to be anywhere else. But there was another bus who ran along the line. Algy was another red bus, but he was more modern than Bertie and full of his own ideas. He was very immature and was always in trouble with the bus manager. The engines and passengers weren't very impressed with his attitude. He was originally brought to help with the mainline bus connections, but it caused so many issues that the bus manager decided to swap Bertie's route for Algy's. Bertie didn't mind the change of scenery at first, but he did miss the branch line. However, he worked hard and was never late. The same couldn't be said for Algy. One morning, the bus manager came to speak with Bertie and Algy. I've been hearing nothing but good things about your service on the mainline route, Bertie, so you'll be having a fresh new coat of paint this morning. Oh, thank you, sir, beeped Bertie. He wasn't repainted often, so it was always a nice surprise for him. Algy, however, was envious. It's not fair. Bertie always gets special treatment, whereas I only get yelled at. I do not play favourite, Algy, the bus manager said sternly. Bertie has earned his keep and his reward. Perhaps if I didn't receive so many complaints from your passengers and the engines, you'd be repainted too. The bus manager then returned to his office, leaving a very angry Algy behind. His mood didn't improve when the painters arrived and began their work on Bertie. I thought the point of a repaint is that you're painted a new colour. Why do you always pick red? Grumbled Algy. I think red suits me. Don't you like your red paint? Asked Bertie politely. Absolutely not. People keep mistaking me for you, sniffed Algy. Well, if you could be repainted, what colour would you choose? Went on Bertie. Algy thought for a moment, but he couldn't decide on a colour, so he went back to grumbling until his driver came to start work. Later, Algy was dropping off passengers for Thomas at the junction, but he was still moaning. You know, I used to shunt trucks back at the big station for the other engines, so I know exactly how you feel, said Thomas kindly. But after I helped out with a rescue involving James and his wooden brake blocks, the fat controller rewarded me with this branch line. Just then, the guard blew his whistle and Thomas had to go.
Goodbye, Algy. Keep the steam up. You'll get your chance soon. Little did Thomas or Algy realise he'd get his chance much sooner than expected. Along Thomas's branch line, there is a siding with a set of buffers next to a signal. This siding is used to store trucks if the yards are full. This siding is called a head shunt. It is vital that the signalman sets the points correctly to keep the trains on the right line. But today, however, the points were set to the siding as the signalman was rather distracted. Thomas swerved over the points with Annie and Clarabel. He didn't notice anything at first until he spotted the buffers. "Cinders and ashes!" cried Thomas. His driver shut off steam and applied the brakes, but it was too late. Luckily, no one was hurt, but the passengers just had a nasty shock. The crew and the guard helped the passengers off the train. Annie and Clarabel's buffers felt rather sore, but not as sore as Thomas's. "What shall we do? What shall we do?" mumbled Annie and Clarabel sadly. Just then they heard a rumble of Algy's engine coming from the road. The guard flagged him down. "Are you all right, Thomas?" asked Algy. "I think so. But do you think you could get my passengers to the next station?" puffed Thomas. Algy agreed to help. It was a rather tight squeeze for the passengers, but they arrived safe and sound at the station. Algy's driver then raised the alarm for Thomas and called for a replacement bus for Thomas's passengers. Another bus came in no time, and the passengers thanked Algy and his driver. The young bus had never received so much praise. The next morning, Algy awoke to see Bertie smiling at him. "I heard about your rescue yesterday. I'm very impressed with you. I'm sure manager will be too," cheered Bertie happily. "Do you think so?" asked Algy. "Absolutely," called a voice. The two buses looked over. It was the bus manager and the fat controller. "I'm very happy with you, Algy. You've done our company proud," said the manager. "And if it wasn't for you, Thomas and his passengers could have been stranded for hours. I'm glad I can rely on this fine company to help with the running of my railway," added the fat controller. Algy beamed. He didn't know what to say. "I think you've earned your original responsibility back, so you'll be back working on the mainline route this afternoon, once you are repainted first." "Mainline? Repainted? Oh, thank you, sir," beeped Algy happily. When the painters arrived, they showed Algy all the colours he could choose from. Algy couldn't decide. He took so long trying to pick one that Thomas arrived with his passenger train. He stopped at the signal and whistled to Algy. "Thank you for the rescue yesterday. That signalman won't be distracted now." The two friends chuckled. Algy then looked at the tank engine all over. He then looked at the painters and smiled. "You know," he said, "I'd like to be blue, please, just like my dear friend Thomas, as a way of thanking him for his advice." Thomas whistles happily as the painters set to work. Algy was delighted to get the red paint off. Algy is a very different bus now. He's as happy as can be, not just because of his new look, but he now works on the mainline route and has made good friends amongst the bigger engines. He's still full of his own ideas, as most young buses would be, but I am happy to say that his ideas are really useful ones indeed.